Pak Island Prison. Pak Island Prison, situated on an isle in Novozero Lake, shelters some of the most violent criminals in all of Russia. The convicts spend roughly 22.5 hours confined in a cramped two-person cell. While you might assume the remaining hour to be dedicated to recreational activities or exercise, it may come as a surprise that for that last hour, they are locked in cages. Its reputation comes from the absolute loneliness and isolation that have driven some of its toughest convicts to madness. Less than 200 Russian criminals are now serving life in prison after the death sentence was scrapped out for good. The institution is so isolated that convicts need to be transported for hours through abandoned towns and the woodlands of the Vologda area before being transferred by boats to the Isle. Now that's a level of security and confinement. The bathroom is a steel pail, and their bedding is just a plank of wooden board. Tuberculosis is a widespread ailment among convicts, and those who die are cremated in a neighboring hamlet, with just a number plate designating their grave. Considering such terrible living conditions, psychological issues are inevitable. The inmates receive no education, they are given only 2 brief visits a year, and are denied any hygiene-related amenities. The threats here don't stem from rebellious inmates, guard aggression, escapes, violence, or sexual assault. The threats are entirely in the imagination of the inmates. 8. La Sabana Prison. While you might expect a prison to be controlled by the National Ministry of Prison Systems, there's a prison in Venezuela controlled by its prisoners themselves. Yes, you heard that right. In what could be named one of the most notorious prisons in the world, the La Sabana Prison is controlled by gang lords serving their time inside. The jail premises were built to hold approximately 15,000 convicts. But guess how many are actually in there? 25,000 of them. The prison is grossly overcrowded and equally understaffed. In 2012, the prison was said to have as few as 8 wardens and 32 guards posted on duty. If you do the math, it adds up to 780 convicts versus 1 guard. Seriously? Lack of security led to a steep rise in gang fights, resulting in some of the most brutal outbursts of violence ever recorded. The most ruthless of which sparked from a deadly gun duel in 1994 that eventually led to the killing of 150 inmates. A group of inmates had started a fire and mercilessly killed anyone who tried to escape. This massacre is deemed one of the deadliest prison incidents to date. The number of casualties shot up as prison guards tried to gain control of the situation. Such riots were a regular affair within the dreaded and deteriorating walls of the cramped-up prison. The living conditions within the prison weren't great either. Due to the lack of space, the prisoners were compelled to string up a swarm of hammocks above each other in their congested 8 by 12 square feet quarters to ensure room for sleeping. As for the others, they just crashed on the ground, elbow to elbow. Inmates bathed from the same water container placed in a corner and relieved themselves into bags tossed out of a barred window into an open-air patio. Imagine the stench of human waste. Within the walls of La Sabana, it's a daily fight for survival. The only source of drinking water was from a rusted lavatory pipe, which would be grimly infested with germs and parasites. Under such adverse conditions, medical care for the wounded or diseased isn't common. Convicts are left to sew their own injuries and heal themselves amid poor, unhygienic conditions, devoid of painkillers or antibiotics. Government-run raids would yield anything from drugs to weapons to even endangered animals being held captive. Be it Coca-Cola or cocaine, pretty much anything could be smuggled in. A riot broke out in 2013 and killed 16 inmates. This led to the closing of the prison gates forever. The last prison lord to take charge, Moshe Edwin, a gang leader, refused to leave his newfound kingdom. Today, there are talks of converting the prison into a museum to showcase one of the most corrupt prison systems in the world. 7. ADX Florence. Dubbed as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, the ADX Supermax Control Unit is meant to house the worst convicts in the United States. It accommodates 336 male inmates and is under 24-hour surveillance. Since 1994, this prison has been harboring some of the world's most dangerous criminals, including El Chapo Guzman, the famous drug lord. He escaped from a high-security facility in Mexico in the year 2015. He managed to escape through an underground tunnel that was more than 1 kilometer long. But ADX Florence isn't as easy to escape from and has been his home ever since his recapture. Inside the walls of this prison are offenders of assaults, spies, scammers, among many other crimes. It also holds several terrorists responsible for the 9/11 attacks on the Twin Towers. Robert Hansen is also a prisoner here. Hansen is recognized for being the worst spy in the history of the United States for his stint of providing intelligence to the USSR despite being an FBI agent for more than 20 years. No one has escaped. It is regarded as the safest jail in the world. Prisoners spend almost 24 hours a day imprisoned in their cells. They only get 9 hours outside per week, sometimes less depending on behavior. They're let out one at a time into an outside cell or a concrete pit that's barely 10 steps long. Even the patio has a construction that replicates a cage. Despite the stunning location in the heart of the Rockies, the prisoners can't peek outside and enjoy their surroundings. The windows are so tiny that they barely allow any amount of light. Once inside, the prisoners tend to lose orientation of where they are placed. Prisoners' cells are built with advanced monitoring equipment, controlled remotely by the guards. Even the lights and shower are controlled remotely. The whole prison is set up with gun turrets and laser beams that ensure the area's safety 24/7. There are reports of prisoners who confess that it's better to receive capital punishment than to be sentenced to life in the ADX. So much so that it has driven 8 inmates to suicide. In 2012, a complaint was filed by prisoners who say the conditions within the prison are simply inhumane. The complaint argues that the circumstances within the institution's walls create an atmosphere that drives the inmates to torture and abuse. 6. Tadmore Prison. The Tadmore military prison, located in Palmyra, Syria, gained recognition worldwide when Amnesty International, a global movement that campaigns against abuse and for human rights, asserted that every aspect of it was designed to dehumanize its inhabitants. Tadmore Prison holds the worst reputation for being synonymous with torture, madness, horror, and death. The episode responsible for this prison's notorious past is when the president of the state, Hafez al-Assad, escaped an assault on his life by the Muslim Brotherhood in 1980. It was stated that he instructed his troops to execute any prisoner inside as a means of getting vengeance for the assault on him. A Palestinian writer jailed for 2 years for voting against the leader once said, "It's utterly unfair to call it a prison. In prison, you have basic rights, but in Tadmore, you have nothing." Another prisoner added that they were not even allowed to make eye contact. With torture lurking around the corner at all times, most prisoners were left to die from random deadly blows, eye gouging, crushed fingers, and limbs. The brutality, torture, and terrible treatment behind the walls of this institution have awarded it an infamous history that cannot be easily forgotten. On June 27, 1980, defending soldiers killed an estimated 1,000 captives in one day. Tadmore was closed in 2001 but reopened in 2011. The brutality continued until finally in May 2015, the ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq, and the Levant took over the prison and demolished the building. However, the terrifying tales continue to live on. 5. The Penitentiary of New Mexico. Commonly known as PNM, the Penitentiary of New Mexico is a men's optimum security correction facility, known to be a house of riots. The Supermax facility is located approximately 15 miles south of metropolitan Santa Fe. Offenders are classified based on a level system centered upon behavior rating step programs, wherein additional privileges are offered for inmates who exhibit proper conduct for a specified duration. So if you show some reform, your life inside might get easier. The Level 6 institution of the facility is a Supermax site that accommodates death row convicts and offenders who pose more significant dangers to other offenders and prison employees. Apart from unhygienic conditions, overcrowding, and nasty food, apparently the guards are also on their worst behavior. The prison authorities were accused of exercising unwarranted pressure and lacking experience in controlling the inmates. Prisoners at PNM witnessed the most deadly prison riot in U.S. history. In 1980, inmates gained control of the whole institution and took 12 guards hostage. The men were dismembered, decapitated, and later hung up on the cells or burned alive. 33 inmates died in the riot. Today, the prison is rumored to be haunted. From hearing ghostly footsteps to whispers down the corridors, doors slamming shut, to unexplainable sightings of dead prisoners, this is one prison you never want to have to visit. 4. San Quentin. San Quentin State Prison opened in 1854 and is the oldest prison in California. It's also one of the most famous in the world. The penitentiary is the state's only facility that conducts executions. The prison includes a gas chamber, though today executions are only done with lethal injection. Violence is a persistent concern at San Quentin, even though it has many guards at every post. A specific instance happened in February 2006 when some racially driven assaults injured 100 convicts and killed 2. The jail is also noted for its dire circumstances. A 2005 assessment stated that it is dangerous to house people in there. In 2006, an inmate on death row sliced a guard's arm to the bone while he was being uncuffed. San Quentin became one of the most frightful institutions on the West Coast. The prison has its own zip code and houses an enormous population of serious offenders. But brutality is not the only thing dealt with within these walls. A considerable portion of San Quentin's popularity is attributable to its prominent convicts who've already done time at the facility. This includes Charles Manson, the legendary Manson family leader who remained at San Quentin until he earned a relocation in the late 1980s. Stanley Tookie Williams was a commander of the Crips gang who stayed at San Quentin and was killed there in 2005. San Quentin is widely mentioned in countless movies, television series, music, and novels, and the institution will likely remain one of the most dangerous jails in the world for some time. 3. Bang Kuang. There aren't many jails in the world that are as brutal as Bang Kuang Central Prison. Situated near the borders of Bangkok, Thailand, the institution is an overcrowded and underpaid maximum security jail that accommodates both local and international offenders. Constructed in the 1930s, this jail was initially designed to contain 3,500 convicts, but today holds more than 8,000, most of whom are serving terms as long as 25 years. About 10% of them are serving life and have shackles riveted to their legs. Shackles, in reality, are a sort of categorization here. New convicts must always wear them for the first 3 months at all times of the day. One meal with a plate of rice and soup is provided each day, and other food must be bought in the in-house cafeteria. Angela Carnegie, an American who served 9 years in this jail for drug trafficking, said that the only food given to her was frequently infested with worms. Likewise, Judith Payne, another inmate, remembers the rat-infested flooring of Bang Kuang and the first night of her confinement. Payne often witnessed guards whipping mentally sick and elderly convicts, and in one instance, she saw a pregnant lady experience the same treatment. Inmates are hungry and sometimes ill due to the absence of running water and the stench of the awful overflowing sewage system. The worst feature of the prison is how simple it is to be stuck there for years, even if it's not merited. U.S. native Jonathan Wheeler was convicted to bang Kuang for importing narcotics and was sentenced to 50 years. Conversely, a local jailed for killing and slaughtering his wife was freed after just 11 years. In Wheeler's words, "Life is so cheap there that drug sentences are worse than murder." So the next time you consider visiting Thailand, make sure you don't find yourself in any criminal or illegal activity. The gates of this overcrowded jail are still open today and welcome anyone stupid enough to be locked up inside. 2. Vladimir Central Prison. The Vladimir Central Jail sits in the historic city of Vladimir, east of Moscow. This is one of Russia's 7 central jails, a cluster of solid brick complexes established over 200 years ago. Former prisoners complain of overcrowding and rampant sickness, but they claim something even more alarming is going on in Russia's correctional system. Accounts alleging severe maltreatment by jail personnel surfaced. Human rights organizations argue the treatment of convicts at certain prisons is intended to damage them mentally. A prisoner named Vladimir Gladkov states that the guard routinely torture their victims. Gladkov stated, "They would force us from our cells, order us to spread our legs and put our hands against the wall, and then beat us with batons until we had to help drag each other back to our cells." Another former convict, Yuri Skokarev, claims that those who sought to report to the authorities would receive even harsher punishment. Human rights campaigner Lev Ponomaryov claims there are several torture prisons around Russia. During the last 8 years, things have gotten so bad that some inmates are driven to suicide. Ponomaryov had presented a page-long letter. It was believed to be written with a prisoner's blood because he had no pen. The writer had appealed for assistance, stating he was frightened for his life. 1. Guantanamo Bay. The Guantanamo Bay detention camp, also known as Gitmo, houses suspected terrorists captured by U.S. military forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. The prison is located on the southeastern coast of Cuba, where the U.S. leases land for its naval base under a treaty dating back over 100 years to the 1898 Spanish-American War. Cubans have protested U.S. presence on the island for years. Following the attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, then-President George W. Bush launched his War on Terror. Following this attack, a military prison was established on Guantanamo Bay, intentionally outside of U.S. territory. Since 2002, some 780 detainees have been held at Gitmo. Since its opening, hundreds of prisoners have been held at Guantanamo, some without charge. Some are simply held on suspicion of their participation or connection to Islamic terrorist groups. According to former President Bush, the foreign detainees were not entitled to U.S. constitutional rights because they were being held outside of U.S. territory. 11 prisoners have been held in Guantanamo for up to 16 years despite never having been charged with a crime. They have been dubbed the Forever Prisoners. The regular rules of the U.S. prison system don't apply in this highly guarded institution. Authorities can punish the inmates in any way they deem fit. There have been several appeals to close the center down. President Joe Biden has promised that the prison will be closed before he leaves office.
Number 10. Shooting the Boss. On a Friday afternoon in August 2019, his roommates discovered Leonard John Ruffer dead inside of their home in Houston, Texas. According to the Harris County deputies, an employee he had recently fired shot and killed Leonard. Witnesses told police that Leonard owned his very own floor installation business. And earlier that day, financial circumstances had forced him to let go of one of his employees. That employee was 22-year-old Jatravius Williams. Police immediately went out and brought Mr. Williams in for questioning. They discovered right away that the suspect had a history of criminal mischief. He was already out on a bond for an unrelated aggravated assault case, and the authorities knew him to carry a pistol. He had initially agreed to be questioned by the police, but changed his mind on his way to the police station. He pulled out a gun and went inside a local gas station where he had a 90-minute standoff with the Houston deputies. He finally surrendered, and police have since charged him with Leonard's murder. Number 9. Terrifying Orlando shooting. In 2017, Army veteran John Robert Newman Jr. shot and killed Kevin Clark. Kevin was one of 5 of John's victims that day. John had recently lost his job, and this did not thrill him. He returned to the offices of Fiamma Incorporated, an RV awning company, first thing in the morning on a Monday. It was the time he knew everyone would be there. John barged into the office where he used to work, shot and killed all his former co-workers, and that was as far as he ever made it. He had lost his job, and it had devastated him enough that he didn't mind losing his own life, or taking the lives of his former colleagues. Kevin Clark, at the time of his tragic passing, was raising 2 children alone. His life had already been full of hardship, starting when his wife died back in 2010. Now his teenage kids, one of them a cheerleader and the other a football star, are orphans with nobody to look after them. John killed not only Kevin, he tore his family apart. The same goes for John's other 4 victims: Robert Snyder, 69, Brenda Montanez Crespo, 44, Jeffrey Roberts, 57, Kevin Lawson, 46. They may have been his targets, but it was their families who also ultimately paid the price. Number 8. Death at the mall. At an outlet mall in Orlando, someone shot and killed another person on a Monday night in February 2020. It was just after 8 p.m. at the Under Armour store, located inside Orlando International Premium Outlets. Management had fired a former employee of the retail store earlier that day, and unfortunately, he did not take it very well. He left the store, built himself up into a horrible rage, and then returned with a weapon. He walked in the door, strolled past eager shoppers, and shot his ex-co-worker. According to the Orlando Police Department, the victim was 37-year-old Eunice Marie Vasquez. The police identified the gunman as David Everett, 46. He had sent threatening emails to every employee he believed was responsible for him being fired. It was just that when he went back to the store, Eunice, his manager, was the perfect target. Many people dislike their managers, even if they are just trying to do their job. What made this scary was that Daniel fled the scene and eluded the police. And because of the emails that were sent out to the other employees, cops had to scramble to track those people down in case Daniel was going after them next. Luckily, he didn't kill anyone else. Police found Daniel about a week later. And when police found him, it was only because a jogger came across his grey Kia Sorento with Daniel still inside, dead of an apparent suicide. Number 7. A case of discrimination. A waitress was fired for not wearing a skirt. Her name is Erin Sandilands, and she was only 18 at the time of her unjust termination. She was told by her boss that she needed to wear a skirt and put on more makeup so she would be easy on the eyes for the customers. Her boss didn't exactly call her ugly, but it was pretty clear what he was getting at. Erin was upset, and she wasn't about to let it go. She took her ex-employer to court and won a discrimination suit in 2016. She won around $4,000 after the tribunal found her workplace had treated her with discrimination differently than if she were a man. Erin told newspapers after the landslide victory that she was overwhelmed and happy with the result, and that more women need to speak out about being discriminated against at work. Make no mistake, this was some hardcore discrimination. She had been a waitress at Cecchini's bistro in the small Scottish town of Ardrossan for just over 2 weeks when her male boss took her aside. He told her to put on a skirt and pretty up her face with makeup. When she refused, saying she looked perfectly presentable without showing her legs and putting chemicals on her face, he fired her. Not only did Erin win a minor victory for herself and women everywhere, but she also made a fool of her boss publicly. From that moment on, after the case swept through the quiet town, he was probably so humiliated and disliked by the population that his life became miserable. Number 6. Church on Sunday. Hotel management fired a woman because she didn't want to work on Sundays. Her name is Marie Jean Pierre, a woman in her 60s from Miami. She told her employer that she had to attend church on Sunday and that she needed the day off. In response, her employer said no, and then he let her go. Marie had been working as a dishwasher at the Conrad Hotel for 10 years. She started in 2006 and in 2015 notified her employer that, as a member of the Soldiers of Christ Church, she was going to need to take all future Sundays off. We don't know why she didn't request them sooner. After 10 years of washing dishes at the same place, you would think they would have treated Marie, if not as a valued employee, at least as a human being. Instead, her employer told Marie to take a hike. Then, when she didn't show up for work 6 Sundays in a row, they fired her. This turned around to bite the employer right on their rear end. She filed a lawsuit claiming the Conrad Hotel, managed by Hilton, violated the 1964 Civil Rights Act. This is the act that protects workers from discrimination based on national origin, race, religion, and sex. She won the case, and a federal jury ordered the hotel to pay her $21 million in damages, plus $35,000 in back wages, and $500,000 for emotional pain. Number 5. Harassed and fired. Kyle Reinhardt is currently suing his former boss over possibly the most obscene and unbelievable act of harassment you've ever heard of. Kyle claims his former boss, Kim Circa, attempted to seduce him in front of her twin sister and his girlfriend. And when Kyle, a veteran with the United States Air Force, refused her bizarre advance, she fired him. He was fired from his job, making over $325,000 a year at a consulting firm, despite his amazing performance, just for not hooking up with his boss. Kim has denied all the accusations against her, but this wasn't an isolated event. Kyle says that throughout his time working with the consulting firm, he had to put up with Kim's wildly inappropriate advances and what he described as a freewheeling drinking and sexual culture. He just wanted to do his job, but his boss wanted him to do something else. The suit is still ongoing in 2022, and we don't know yet if Kyle will win the settlement or if Kim will keep her job. Number 4. Fired from the sugar mill. The manager of a sugar mill company fired an elderly man in Florida from his job after 30 years of hard work. His name is Felix Cabrera, and he was 86 years old in 2021 when they fired him. After 3 decades of loyal work at the company, Felix was understandably angry. According to the police, he went into a violent rage first thing in the morning after he learned he was being fired. He tried to reason with his boss at the Sugarcane Growers Cooperative in Bella Glade, but his boss wasn't listening. He told Felix to clock out and never come back. What happened next was shocking. Felix, in his blind rage, pulled a gun out of his pocket and shot his boss several times, killing him on the spot. Somebody heard the gunshots and called the police immediately, and deputies arrived on the scene within minutes. There they found the victim dead near the entrance of the building, and Felix stalking about with his loaded weapon. The sheriff's office said that by their deputies arriving so quickly, apprehending Felix within minutes, they may have prevented him from going on a crazed shooting spree. It's terrible that one man ended up dead, and it was horrible for Felix that they fired him abruptly just because he was almost 90. Still, it was a good thing the cops showed up before the deranged ex-employee could do any more damage. They have charged him with first-degree murder, and he will probably live out the rest of his days in jail. Number 3. Stopping a kidnapping. Dylan Regan was a 32-year-old man from Portland, Oregon, who worked at the Home Depot. On July 3, 2017, Dylan posted his story on Facebook explaining how management had fired him for assisting the police in preventing a kidnapping. He was at work on May 12, 2017, when one of his co-workers said he saw a man attacking a woman in the parking lot. Regan ran out to see what was happening and heard a woman screaming. Some crazed lunatic was trying to abduct the woman's child right there in the parking lot. Dylan called the police, who then instructed the employee to follow the man but not touch him or engage with him. The police said to keep an eye open, see where he's going, and help them catch him before he gets away. This was the right thing to do. He single-handedly may have saved the child's life by helping the police track the kidnapper down. But after he returned to the store, his supervisor scolded him for leaving his post. 4 weeks after that, they fired him. This is despite the fact that he was a hero and that he had been working at that Home Depot store for 4 years already. After his Facebook post went viral, his situation blew up on national news. Home Depot immediately offered to reinstate his position at the company, as well as pay him for the time since he had been terminated. But really, they only did it once they started getting bad publicity. Number 2. Erasing data. Juliana Baril pled guilty in 2021 to 1 count of computer intrusion, a crime that could have her face up to 10 years in prison. According to the court filings, management fired Juliana from her part-time position at her credit union in New York in May of that same year. 2 days after they fired her, she sabotaged the credit union. Juliana remotely accessed the file server and deleted 3,500 directories, 20,000 files, and 21.3 gigabytes of data. The deleted data was extremely important, not just for her work, but for their customers. She deleted mortgage loan applications and sabotaged their shared network documents. It cost her employer around $10,000 to fix the damage. But some things that were lost, they just couldn't find again. The FBI agent involved in the case, Michael Driscoll, said Juliana may have thought she was getting back at her employer, but she was just harming the customers. And while she may have felt justified in what she did, she's probably going to be regretting her decision when she winds up in jail. This was a lose-lose situation for everyone, but more for Juliana. The bank will go on banking, but Juliana's life will never be the same. Number 1. Hired Thursday, dead by Sunday. A man in Florida was hired at his job on Thursday and fired on Sunday morning. 2 hours later, he tried to kill his boss. The ex-employee is Juan Lewis, a 23-year-old young man who started working at Bernarda Aluminium Products in August 2018. Management fired him a few days after he started working because his work ethic was questionable. He was throwing supplies and tools on the ground and just acting like he didn't care about the job. It was better for the employer to fire him right away than have to deal with such a negative attitude in the long run. And to be quite honest, his employer had been right to trust that feeling because Juan was clearly unpredictable. After they fired him, he sat outside and waited for his district supervisor for 2 hours. Once his boss had left work, Juan followed him and his girlfriend for over 1.5 miles in his vehicle. And as Juan followed, He hung out the window of his car and tried to shoot the man from behind. By the time Juan realized the cops were coming and that he needed to get out of there, he had already put bullets in the rear bumper, the door of the trunk, and the right rear tire of his boss's vehicle. He didn't hurt anybody in the incident, but it was extremely close. Those bullets could have gone anywhere, into his boss's head or some poor person just walking down the street. Police later arrested Juan at his home and hauled him off to jail.
Number 10. Christian Kit Martin. Christian Kit Martin enjoyed a 30-year career as an Army major before he went on to become a private commercial airline pilot. But his decades-long success was cut short in late 2019 when he was arrested at an airport in Kentucky for allegedly murdering 3 of his neighbors. It all started in 2015. Martin was going through a bitter divorce from his ex-wife, Joan. Their neighbor, Calvin Phillips, was helping Joan move her things out of the former couple's shared home when they found some classified military information and other incriminating materials that landed Martin in a court-martial hearing. Phillips was slated to testify as a witness at the hearing, but it never happened because he turned up dead with multiple gunshot wounds, along with his wife Pamela and a third neighbor, Edward Dancero. Martin was discharged from the Army and started a new life as an American Airlines pilot. Meanwhile, the triple murder case went cold. New evidence eventually came to light and investigators reopened the case. This time, their findings led them to Martin, who's now spending the rest of his life behind bars for killing his 3 neighbors in an attempt to cover up his past crimes. He was also convicted on 2 counts of first-degree burglary, 2 counts of arson, 3 counts of tampering with evidence, and criminal attempt to commit arson. Number 9. William Thomas. Disturbing video footage that was leaked in 2019 showed what looked like a pilot spitting and fighting with a female employee on a jet bridge at Denver International Airport. The pilot, William Thomas, appeared to start the confrontation, to which the woman, named Marisha Sporer, responded by slapping him. He then proceeded to punch her repeatedly in the face and stomach. The footage sparked widespread concerns about the employee's conduct. Their employer, a regional airline known as Republic Airways, quickly reassured the public that there were no passengers on the plane at the time, and that both the pilot and his co-worker were fired following the incident. But that wasn't the end of it. The spat caught the attention of the police, who opened an investigation into the violence, which reportedly took place during a layover. It eventually came to light that the pair had been involved in an intimate relationship, and that Sporer reportedly saw something that upset her on Thomas's phone. They agreed to part ways, but apparently couldn't fully let go enough to keep things professional. Unfortunately for both, they decided to sort it out in the worst place imaginable, at work. They were charged with assault and disturbing the peace, and had to answer to the law in addition to losing their jobs. Number 8. Andrew Macintosh. Andrew Macintosh was a pilot with the Netherlands and Belgian-based company TUI Airways. In 2018, the 54-year-old and his 56-year-old soon-to-be ex-wife Patricia were trying to sell their home in the English village of Knightcote, but couldn't find a buyer. When Andrew suggested lowering the asking price on the £300,000 house, Patricia refused. It sent him into a rage, and he proceeded to punch and kick his wife, then beat her to death with a frying pan. He then confessed to the gruesome act to a friend via text message, and the friend contacted the authorities, who proceeded to arrest Macintosh. Andrew admitted to killing Patricia, but denied committing murder based on diminished responsibility. In other words, he argued that mental illness, in his case depression, caused him to act in a way that he normally wouldn't have if he were in his right mind. In his own words, he lost control. But the court didn't buy his explanation. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 17 years. The sentence came as good news to Patricia's family, who expressed their disappointment that Macintosh forced them to endure a trial instead of pleading guilty to the allegations against him. Number 7. Clayton Osman. It's scary enough to be on a flight where a fellow passenger begins acting erratically, but it's exponentially more terrifying when the pilot has a meltdown in midair. This is what one group of unfortunate travelers learned during a JetBlue flight in 2012. During the trip from New York to Las Vegas, Captain Clayton Osman allegedly began hitting random buttons and telling air traffic controllers to quieten down. He reportedly spoke nonsensically to First Officer Jason Dowd, saying that they needed to take a leap of faith, that things don't matter, and that we're not going to Vegas. He then started rambling about religion, turned the communications radio off, and dimmed the equipment monitors. Co-pilot Dowd cleverly tricked Osman into going into the passenger compartment, then locked the cockpit door and changed the code. When Osman couldn't get back in, he told passengers to say their prayers and ran down the aisle ranting about Jesus and Al-Qaeda. Thankfully, he was subdued by passengers, who tied him up with seatbelt extenders. In the meantime, Dowd manned the aircraft with the help of an off-duty pilot. The flight was diverted to Amarillo, Texas, where it landed safely. Osman had worked for JetBlue for 12 years leading up to the incident. He had shown up unusually late for the flight that day. He was suspended from his job and charged with interference with the flight crew, but was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Court documents alleged that the brief psychotic episode was triggered by a lack of sleep. Osman sued JetBlue for not recognizing that he was mentally ill and blamed the company for endangering the lives aboard Flight 191. And it's certainly true that the case highlighted the need to perform regular mental health checks on anyone who has people's lives in their hands as daily part of their job. Number 6. Thomas Cloyd and Christopher Hughes. The United States Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, bans pilots from drinking less than 8 hours before flying, and some airlines have even stricter standards. Apparently, none of that mattered to pilots Thomas Cloyd and Christopher Hughes, who went out drinking in Miami one night in 2002, when they knew they had to catch an early flight to Phoenix the next morning. Employees at the bar they were drinking at finally kicked the pair out close to 5 a.m. They arrived back at their hotel a half hour later and caught a shuttle to the airport just 4 hours after that. Cloyd reportedly acted belligerent as soon as he arrived at the airport. He refused to throw his coffee away when security instructed him to do so. He finally complied when the police were called. Staff members smelled alcohol in Cloyd's breath, but he denied that he had been drinking. The plane had already been pulled to the runway when police arrived to arrest the disorderly pilot and his co-pilot. TSA staff called the aircraft back to the terminal, where breathalyzers revealed that Cloyd's blood alcohol content was 0.091. Meanwhile, Hughes blew 0.084. Both were well above the FAA's limit of 0.04. Their careers were effectively over by then, and investigators soon found out that Cloyd had 2 prior arrests for alcohol-related offenses that he never told his employer about. The case bounced back and forth between state and federal court, before ultimately landing in the state of Florida's jurisdiction. Cloyd and Hughes tried, but failed to get the case thrown out, and were respectively sentenced to 5 years and 2.5 years in prison. Number 5. Andreas Lubitz. On March 24, 2015, an Airbus A320 passenger aircraft flying under the Germanwings budget airline crashed into the French Alps while traveling from Barcelona to Dusseldorf. It was the first fatal crash in the company's 18-year history, killing all 144 passengers and 6 crew members, and the third deadliest French air disaster of all time. The impact was so intense that the plane literally disintegrated. The biggest piece of wreckage was roughly the size of a car. Thankfully, the flight data recorder was still found intact, enabling detectives to piece together the events leading up to the tragedy. An investigation into the tragedy concluded that the co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz, had flown the plane into the mountainside deliberately. At some point, Captain Patrick Sonderheimer left the cockpit, possibly to use the bathroom. Lubitz locked himself inside the cockpit alone and ignored Sonderheimer when he began banging on the door from the outside. He also refused to answer questions from air traffic control and didn't transmit a distress signal. He could be heard on the cockpit voice recording breathing steadily. Screaming passengers could also be heard during the final moments. Investigators discovered that Lubitz actually had a long history of being suicidal, and that he was even denied a U.S. pilot's license due to his past with mental health issues, which he failed to disclose to his employer. In the few days before the crash, he had researched ways to take his own life. Sadly, privacy laws had prevented Lubitz's doctor from warning Germanwings about his past mental health struggles, leading many to call for legal reforms that would allow doctors to break confidentiality under certain circumstances. Number 4. Steven Silver. On January 19, 1988, a small twin turboprop aircraft crashed a few miles outside Durango La Plata County Airport as it approached for landing. It was flying a regularly scheduled regional route from Denver to Durango via Trans-Colorado Airlines when things went horribly wrong. After descending at 3 times the recommended rate for the approach, the plane struck the ground, then pitched up and rolled several times before hitting the ground and screeching to a stop. 9 of the 17 people aboard died, including Captain Stephen Silver. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, investigated the accident and found that First Officer Ralph Harvey had a history of alcohol and substance abuse, but he was found to be drug and alcohol-free at the time of the crash. At some point during the investigation, a pilot who wasn't involved in the wreck told the NTSB that a woman had approached him claiming to be Captain Silver's fiancée. She reportedly said that she and Captain Silver had used a bag of cocaine together the night before the accident. This left officials wanting to dig deeper. The NTSB never got in contact with the woman, but her claims were confirmed by traces of cocaine that were eventually found in Silver's blood and urine. The evidence suggested that the captain used cocaine between 12 and 18 hours before the flight, and that his drug use probably affected his judgment and flying skills. While the nature of the plane's descent is what ultimately caused the crash, this was the first time that a pilot's cocaine use was cited as a contributing factor in an accident that killed passengers. Number 3. James Fristzen Taylor. Southwest Airlines pilot James Fristzen Taylor didn't go to work expecting to make national headlines in June 2011, but that's what happened. He went on an insulting and hate-filled rant that was, unfortunately for him, overheard by air traffic control. He didn't realize he was being recorded when he erupted into a tirade over his dissatisfaction with the appearances of the flight crews he recently worked with. The disturbing diatribe was filled with offensive anti-gay remarks and comments about people's weight and age. During the verbal onslaught, which came during a discussion with coworkers about plans to party together, Taylor specifically identified Houston, Texas, for allegedly having the least attractive group of Southwest employees across the nation. A recording of the diatribe went viral, and at first, nobody knew who the pilot in question was. Taylor came forward and identified himself as the man behind the cringeworthy rant and issued an apology after being suspended without pay. In it, he wrote that he deeply regretted his words and understood that he needed to be more sensitive and tolerant. Not everyone was satisfied with Taylor's apology, but it was apparently good enough for his employer. Surprisingly, he didn't lose his job and was instead required to attend diversity training. Number 2. Ciel Salam. Shortly after being caught in his hotel room with methamphetamine in 2012, Lion Air pilot Ciel Salam tested positive for having the drug in his system. It happened just 3 hours before he was scheduled to fly, and was the latest among a slew of similar incidents among Indonesian pilots. The incident reflected a widespread and growing problem with methamphetamine abuse among airline employees. In fact, another pilot who was previously arrested for possession had tipped the authorities off to Salam also being a user. The problem was that there were not enough commercial pilots throughout Indonesia, as well as the rapid growth of Lion Air and other airlines. The country's middle class was growing, which meant there were more people booking flights. The airlines simply weren't prepared to keep up with the demand. Number 1. Parminder Gatti. Parminder Gatti received her pilot's wings in 2011, but it would be inaccurate to say that she actually earned them. After executing a bumpy landing at one airport and somehow failing to raise the alarm about her credentials, Gatti touched a plane down nose first at Delhi's Indira Gandhi International Airport. She was extremely lucky that her faulty moves didn't kill or seriously harm anyone aboard, and her rookie errors caught the attention of India's flight authorities. A closer look at Gulati's qualifications, or in her case, lack thereof, showed that she had forged the necessary documents to obtain a pilot's license. But as it turned out, forged pilot licenses were nothing new in India, where candidates are known for exaggerating their number of training hours and falsifying documents in other ways. The practice has become increasingly common as people seek to bypass the requirements in order to land high-salary jobs. The incident with Gulati and several others where people were suspected of faking their credentials prompted the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA, to review thousands of pilots' licenses. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be on a flight with an erratic passenger or delayed at the airport for 12 hours? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye!